So the mic is hot. All right. So welcome everyone to Outright Limited Rebel Poets, organized by Jimmy Wright. And welcome to the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, which is the space you find yourselves in right now. Hi, Stephen. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder of the Bureau. I'm being helped tonight by Atsudis, one of our volunteers. So this Bureau, thank you, yes. The Bureau, for any new folks, is a queer bookstore that that my partner Donnie Joachim and I founded in 2012, and we've been here at the center since 2014. The short explanation for our very lengthy name is that we are a government agency for a government that does not yet exist. Thank you. I'm worried when I don't get a laugh. It's meant to be fun, but also partly serious and to get us thinking about where legitimacy comes from. So we are an all-volunteer organization, so we rely on donations, on sales, and the kindness and generosity of the center, which allows us to use this space. So we have a suggested donation of $10. We always say give what you can if you can. And we are also happy if you would like to support us by buying books. So I will leave it to you as to how you decide to support us, but we appreciate the help, whatever you're able to give. And those of you online can also give at Venmo at BGSQD. So I'll pass that around. And if you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up to that at the back of the room or on our website, which is bgsqd.com. Those 5 letters that are everywhere you look in this room. And I don't know, did I already say our hours? Our hours are Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m. And then we often stay open late when we have events such as this. So you can check out that calendar, our events calendar on our website, again, bgsqd.com. And we keep quite a busy calendar here. We'd like to get the folks in the door, and it's not always so easy when you're tucked away on the 2nd floor in a corner. So before I bring Jimmy up to get the night rolling, I wanted to read a land acknowledgement and a call for a ceasefire. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. We also want to recognize that today is the 133rd day of Israel's genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people, funded by our tax dollars and enabled by our government's unwavering support. We hope that you will join us in calling for an immediate permanent ceasefire, an end to the siege, and an end to the occupation in order to stop the collective punishment of Palestinians and to ensure the swift delivery of much needed food, water, medicine, fuel, and medical aid to the people of Gaza. And now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome back to the Bureau for what may be the 5th, 6th, who knows how many times, but we're always happy to have Jimmy here. And he always brings a crowd with him, which we're super happy about. So please give it up for Jimmy Wright.
Thank you very, very much for coming out and your total support. We're going to start off. We will have a Q&A. not at the end of the program, but halfway through. But we will start off with two. One is a poet, Alicia Dunnigan, and she will be doing Wanda Robinson, also known as
Liani Mataka.
Liani Mataka. I knew her when she was in Washington as Wanda Robinson. And they will be doing the poetry of Wanda Robinson. Also, we will be giving short biographical information on each author and each poet, I should say. And I want to say that this is a three-part. We will be doing a second part because there were so many poets that were active in the 1960s and early 70s, just right here in New York. So the first part will be here. The second part will be in the other borough, Staten Island. It's part of New York. Okay. So don't be afraid to come. Okay, it's part of New York. And I want to emphasize that. And the ferry is free. And when you get off the ferry, it'll be at the bookstore, Everything Goes. And I'm sure you have a great time. The third one will be on the poets of the Black Revolution. Poets like Sonia Sanchez, and Nikki Giovanni, Gil Scott-Heron, you know, those poets of that time period. And we will now start with Wanda Robinson. And also, we will have Lydia Soto reading also, along with whoever it is. My beloved sister, Alicia.
We'll talk after.
I will get-
Good evening. I'm going to do, I hope it's a short, relatively short biography. I don't want to bore anyone. Wanda Robinson was a contemporary of Gil Scott-Heron, the last poets, and Maya Angelou. She only recorded 2 spoken word albums in the early 1970s. The first one was Black Ivory, later followed by Me and a Friend. Both were released by Perception Records, a New York label. Black Ivory peaked at number 29 on Billboard Black Albums chart when it was released in 1971. Wanda Robinson was born in November of 1949 in Baltimore, Maryland. She was one of 10 children, and she was raised by her grandmother. As a teen, her first paid gig was writing letters for girls whose boyfriends were in Vietnam, and she charged 25 cents a letter for these services. As the Vietnam War progressed and she started attending community college, she continued to write, and her writing became more political, although it continued to focus on male and female relationships. After hearing R&B artist Arthur Prysock's 1969 poetry album, This Is My Beloved, she decided she could do that also. So she read her poems into a tape recorder with a stereo playing in the background and played it for her classmates. A local DJ named Anthony Davis played some of her works on his show. Soon, Wanda Robinson received a call from Perception Records asking the 20-year-old if she wanted to come to New York to cut a record. Perception Records opened their entire music library to Wanda. She selected a lot of material from a New York soul trio called Black Ivory. She says at this point, she walked into a sort of disorganized, never-ending party. She remembers the label keeping artists working however they could. She said, whatever you wanted, they would get for you. She said they asked her what she would like, and she told them nothing. After recording Black Ivory and performing doggedly to promote it, she fled New York feeling depleted and underpaid. Back in Baltimore, she held various jobs, continued to write, and shaved her head and changed her name to Liani Mataka. She did not want to deal with labels or producers anymore. However, encouraged by her friends, she met a guy who worked with Maya Angelou. They took a car ride, he put his hand on her leg, and she got out of the cab and didn't take any more meetings. In the meantime, in 1973, me and a friend was cobbled together by perception from tracks she had recorded with Black Ivory. And that happened without her knowledge. Since that time, her works have turned up all over the world and have been sampled, repackaged, and repurposed by many musicians and rappers. When Perception went bankrupt in the mid-1970s, the catalog was purchased by former Black Ivory manager Lenny Adams. When he died, the Sanctuary Records Group bought rights to the label's entire output. In the mid-1970s, Mataka met Paul Coates, owner of Baltimore's Black Classic Press. Once he began the process of starting a publishing house, he told her that if she waited for him, Black Classic would publish everything she ever wrote. And so she waited, and Coates made good on his promise. Starting in 1988, Black Press has released 5 of her books of poetry. In 1988, Never a Strangers, 1994, Restoring the Queen, 2000, Being a Strong Black Woman, 2011, Prince of Kokomo, and just this year, January 17, 2024, Return of the King. And also, I found on YouTube a spoken word album of hers from 2000 entitled Half Stepping Through History. So here are 2 poems. One is like a relationship poem or whatever. Well, it's not quite relationship. It's called Instant Replay. Tall and lean and looking somewhat like a Black museum piece perched on the bar stool, like a Stokely or maybe an Eldridge. He was so cool. I could tell that he could tell just how cool I thought he looked at me. So I started easing up to him like a Siamese cat, purring my attentions all over his too beautiful to be shoulders until he spoke, and I grabbed every word, tucking them safely inside my head, and everything he said was like a quote from a Black nationalist manual. But I hung in there, feeling him out and tapping his head, which was by definition very much together. And then stepping back to marvel at what I had chanced to find, I breathed a heavy sigh, because finally, he was exactly where I wanted to be. Following an urge which plagued me from the start, I reached out to touch his face. So smooth, so soft, so only like a man's face can be. But when I touched it, the skin disintegrated right in my hands. And there was a buzzing sound like a tape recorder rewinding to start a worn-out tape on a brand new chain. So I stepped aside, letting another take my place, with the same questioning eyes, with the same welcoming smile. Well, so much for love at first sight. And this one, okay, you go next. Then I'll follow.
Okay. So, can y'all hear me with my mask?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, my name is Nadia Soto, and I'm not nervous at all. I'm reading John Harvey's Blues. My friend is losing his mind for fear of going insane, because no matter how down he is, there is still room below. His is no tragedy, just a life characterized by gross misinterpretations, unbending images of self, and pure uncut anger that never allows him to hang loose or be without pain for 1 second. He is so aware of himself that the absurdity of it all is killing him. Emitted from the womb at the wrong time, under the wrong sign. Every day is just an extension of yesterday, a hassle. And getting out of bed in the morning is like slow suicide because he knows what's going down. Agonizingly, I watch him bleed. Fun comes hard and good times not at all. And there are so many things I could tell him, but he is my friend, and I can see no good in expanding his consciousness to one more level or to widening his senses by introducing him to any more thoughts that cannot be dealt with by sane persons. Sometimes I think he will have to kill someone just to maintain his mental balance. And as repulsive as it sounds, I would be able to justify his actions. Logically, validly, and with very little imagination, his life is beyond reason. The very nature of his being is so insane that I almost give up, searching for ways and means to comfort him, to keep him around until tomorrow. And if I thought there was peace for him in the grave, I would kill him, because that's what friends are for. But unfortunately for those who are miserable, and unfortunately for him, I do not believe that death will even things out. Unbeknownst to him, he is every friend that I have. He is the very epitome of my own people. He is the mirror reflection of me. And I love myself, all of us, to such an extent that I will gladly lay myself down if only to see one me set free. From castration, from alienation, from regimentation, from dehumanization, from Americanization, from the need to be alive. And it's so hard to laugh and smile and joke with him without letting on that I know he is in my guts and my soul and the very core of all my futile attempts to stay above load and survive the pressure of too much truth. My friend, we are one. So please, hold on, because without you, all that I am and can ever be will amount to nothing. Wow.
And this is also by Wanda Robinson. It's entitled Karma, and it's very strong. All I want to know is, did I hurt people? Did I take their love and smash it against the windows of their souls? Did I violate someone? Did I rape revolutionaries? Did I steal from churches and temples? What could I have done to deserve meeting you? Was I a wrongful war veteran? Did I sell drugs? Did I squeal on Nat Turner? Was I an overseer? Did I make babies with my own children? What could I ever have done to deserve meeting you? Did I pimp children? Did I help frame Garvey? Did I sell Black people to white people for their pleasure? Did I help guide the goddamn ships in? What could I possibly have done to deserve meeting you?
All right. This one's called Soon, also by Wanda Robinson. Oh, hello. One blonde, one brunette. We spent the day downtown, oblivious to what, I don't have to tell you. We were friends, doing the things that friends do. We partook of each for one whole day, and the smiles were real, the eyes were real, the feelings were real. Later, settling down to do a little dope for friendship's sake, we got loaded. Sitting in nod positions numbered 10 and 12, rapping ceased, and uneasy in the silence, I looked at her and sang a silent requiem because I was really going to miss her, and soon.
This is the final poem of Robinson. It's called The Meeting Place. Shoulders hunched, eyes at half mast, cigarette protruding from mouth. He plays his piano as if somebody just died, and the images around him sit, feeding their cancer, drowning their senses, talking about those things that are relevant, but to what? Everyone has a story to tell, but nobody listens. So they come every night, hoping to get what they need without having to say they need it. The man in the corner tells his newly discovered friend the things she wants to hear. His wife doesn't understand him, and he's only there because of the children. She's never done this sort of thing before, but he's so lonely and so misunderstood. So they leave, him thinking he got over on her, and her thinking she's got over on him. But the pianist knows his wife doesn't understand him because he's never there. And she would walk off with anything in pan so long as he had a story to tell. So he plays an F sharp as a tribute to their foolishness. Meanwhile, two men sit at the bar, trying hard to psych each other out because they both like men, but are not enough to admit it. So they make arrangements to go over to Joe's apartment because he has a fantastic stereo component set. And Sam, he just loves component sets. So they leave, and the pianist strikes another note because a lie is only a lie if you believe it. And some people, they'll believe anything if it's convenient. And in another corner, in the dark, in the rear, a woman sits alone, trying hard to look 10 years younger, wondering who to tolerate for the night, thinking surely there's one young man in the crowd looking for a mother image. If not, she'll just have to die again, as the piano plays her requiem. And it's a lousy job. And if it weren't for the holes in his arm, he'd probably quit. The next poet is Audre Lorde, and Lela will give the bio and read a few of her poems.
Hi, everyone. Audre Lorde was born in 1934, February 18th, so her birthday's in 2 days. So poet and author Audre Lorde used her writing to shine light on her experience of the world as a Black lesbian woman, and later as a mother and person suffering from cancer. A prominent member of the women's and LGBTQ rights movements, her writings call attention to the multifaceted nature of identity and the ways in which people from different walks of life could grow stronger together. Audre Geraldine Lorde was born on February 18th, 1934, to Frederick and Linda Belmore Lorde, immigrants from Grenada. She was the youngest of 3 sisters and grew up in Manhattan. As a child, Lorde dropped the Y from her first name to become Audrey. Lorde connected with poetry from a young age. She once commented, "I used to speak in poetry when I couldn't find the poems to express the things I was feeling. That's what started me writing poetry." She was around 12 or 13 at the time. She graduated from Hunter High School, where she edited the literary magazine. After an English teacher rejected one of her poems, Lorde submitted it to 17 magazine, and it became her first professional publication. After working at a variety of jobs in New York and Connecticut, Lorde studied for a year at the National University of Mexico in Cuernavaca. It was there that she grew confident in her identity as both a lesbian and a poet. Lorde then earned her bachelor's degree from Hunter College and a master's degree in library science from Columbia University. She worked as a librarian in New York City Public Schools from 1961 to 1968. In 1962, Lorde married Edwin Rollins, a white gay man. They had 2 children, Elizabeth and Jonathan. Lorde and Rollins divorced in 1970. During the 1960s, Lorde began publishing her poetry in magazines and anthologies, and also took part in the civil rights, anti-war, and women's liberation movement. Lord published her first volume of poems, The First Cities, in 1968. That same year, she earned a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts and became the writer in residence at Tougaloo College, a historically Black college in Mississippi. There, she discovered her love of teaching and met Frances Clayton, a professor of psychology and her partner until 1989. Lord continued writing prolifically through the 70s and 80s, exploring the intersections of race, gender, and class, as well as examining her own identity within a global context. Her 1978 collection, The Black Unicorn, was inspired by a trip to Benin with her children. Diagnosed with breast cancer in 1977, Lord found out that the ordeals of cancer treatment and mastectomy were shrouded in silence for women and found them even further isolating as a Black lesbian woman. Lord felt that the narratives of coping and healing she did encounter were designed solely for white heterosexual women. In an effort to combat this silence and to foster connection with other lesbians and women of color facing the same struggle, Lord offered a raw portrait of her pain, suffering, reflection, and hope in the Cancer Journals, 1980. The book won the American Library Association's Gay Caucus Book of the Year Award for 1981 and became a classic work of illness narrative. Lord's cancer returned, so she went into remission and her cancer returned, and she passed away in 1992. Shortly before her death, she participated in an African naming ceremony in which she took the name Gamba Adisa. Befitting the writer who continually explored and expressed her self-identity, it means warrior, she who makes her meaning known. I'm going to read 3 of her poems. The first one is called Return. You did not clock the turning of the leaves, the silent browning of the grass, nor brief bright November rising out of the hills. You came with the sunset, the bough stripped to the curtness of winter, an accomplished act. So you well could say, I never trusted autumn. Who did not cradle the weeping root of flamed October sorrel, nor taste the bitter, hard-won peace, red browning autumn brought, one whom you loved and left to face the dark alone. That's 1955. An earlier poem. I'm doing it a little chronologically. The first one is earlier and the last one's gonna be later. Father, the year has fallen. Father, the year has fallen. Leaves bedeck my careful flesh like stone. One shard of brilliant summer pierced me and remains. By this only unregenerate bone, I am not dead, but waiting. When the last warmth is gone, I shall bear in the snow. 1968. And this last one is called Rites of Passage, and it's to Martin Luther King Jr. Rock the boat to a fare thee well. Once we suffered, dreaming, into the place where the children are playing their child's games, where the children are hoping. Knowledge survives if unknowing. They follow the game without winning. Their fathers are dying. Back to the freedom of wise children, playing at knowing. Their fathers are dying, whose deaths will not free them from growing, from knowing. When the game becomes foolish, a dangerous pleading for timeout of power. Quick, children, kiss us. We are growing through dream.
I'm doing an unknown poet. who was very big in the 1960s. It's Calvin Herndon. He was born in 1962, 32, I'm sorry. He was born in 1932, and he died in 2001. He was an American sociologist, a poet, and an author. And his most renowned book was Sex and Racism in America. He was a teacher at Fisk University in the mid-1950s, and he also worked as a social worker. He went abroad, particularly to London, and he studied there with R.D. Laing and C.L.R. James. He returned to the US in 1970 and went to teach at Oberlin College. He was a professor of African American Studies, and he taught there until his retirement in 1999. Hunton was the author of 9 books. He was a novelist, an essayist, a playwright, and what he called a social scientist. He also wrote the groundbreaking book, The Sexual Mountain and Black Women Writers. His one novel was Scarecrow. He wrote 3 plays, 3 books of poetry, and 5 nonfiction. He's the author of several significant books of social and literary criticism. White Papers for White Americans is one. He also published scholarly articles ranging on the works of Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, and Chester Himes. He used his personal essays. It was his experience as a Black man in America as a window on the larger workings of race, sex, and class. He also argued about Alice Walker and The Color Purple. He was one of the few Black men that loved the novel and defended her. He also was very involved in the political movement. And this is what he said about The Color Purple. It's one of the best sociological dramatic studies written on the subject of sexual oppression within the Black race. He taught at various colleges. He taught in South Carolina, Florida, Alabama, and Louisiana. In 1970, he became a professor at the Oberlin College. I'm supposed to read his poetry at this point, but I can't seem to see them. So we will have a break while I enlarge the work. It's stuff in the back. We'll have like a 10-minute break, then I will read the poetry, and Stephen will do March Pierce, and we will do Langston Hughes. Okay. Have a break.
Yeah.
I'm just making out.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, I'll be over there.
Okay, all right. Let's do that.
I'm interested in reading. I've never read. I know about that. I've never read poetry.
It's me. Yes.
Yeah, and you're into poetry.
There you go. That's all I, yeah, that's all I care about. Yes. Oh, really? Yeah. Intentionally like this. Yes. Right, exactly. Yeah. That's what you do. Yeah. Yeah, and right, and you go to all of that. I don't like it, but it's just. I do, yeah, I don't like that. So I prefer to the, yeah. It's just, I have that stuff. Yeah. There's a name. I don't know either, but I can use that. Yeah, but right now I love it. You know, and you know, I you can take the paper to. Oh my God. It's gross. Yeah, I don't even drink tea from two bags because it tastes. Yeah, I used to. Yeah, I use a French. Yes. Oh my gosh. That happens to me so much. Yeah, and I do exam sugar, half and half of sugar. And I don't even use sugar. It's just one teaspoon, and it's not even. I used to talk about every mother's. And I was like, right, just like beverage. Yeah. So because it's, yeah. Right, you know, I think that I don't know. Yeah. When I go. When I go to right, yeah, yes, and yeah, I find that helps. That I still get my
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, no. Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. Our house was like, everything.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes they don't mean that's still like, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's I know. They don't, they can't tell them. Yeah.
Overdue. I think that.
I struggle with that because. Okay, I'm gonna go back.
It's just like, you know,
I know exactly what you mean.
I really loved your reading. That's really great. Yeah.
And I can feel both of those things, you know?
It's interesting, like I said, I was thinking about it, it's just like, even when I'm in a different language, it's like being a translator, because if you bring yourself to it, so like, the way I read her and the way you read her would be totally different. Yeah.
Wow. It's like, we can't sit at home, everybody on our breath. It's like, it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's just.
Yeah, it's homework and it's mysterious.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be funny, right? Because I didn't know, like, it was like a thing.
Yeah.
Just going out different things.
Okay, this has been enlarged, so I should be able to read it. His poetry is very difficult reading. I found myself reading it 2 or 3 times. I spoke to a friend who introduced me to his poetry. And she said to me, of course it's difficult. He was a difficult man. I don't think that's an excuse. So here goes. This one is called The Madhouse. And I'm going to read it slow and let it sink in. And you'll probably understand it better than I do. Here's a place that is no place. And here is no place that is a place. A place somewhere beyond the reaches of time and beyond the reaches of those who in time bring flowers and fruit to this place. Yet here is a definite place and a definite time, fixed in a timelessness of precise vintage, from which to view flowers and view fruit, and those who come bearing them, those who come weary but sympathetic, noisily crackling the unbearable silence of this place. They do not know something must always come from something, and that nothing always comes from nothing. And that is nothing to drive us mad. And I found one that I actually liked and understood. It's called The Distant Drums. I'm not a metaphor, a symbol. This you hear is not the wind of the trees, nor a cat being maimed in the street. I am being maimed in the street. It is I who weep, laugh, and feel pain or joy. Speak this because I exist. This is my voice. These words are my words. My mouth speaks them. My hand writes them. I'm a poet. It is my fist you hear beating against your ear. And now Stephen will do Marge Pierce, the biographical and the poem.
Right. Well, I'm a nervous wreck. Marge Piercy is a Jewish, socialist, feminist, anti-war political activist, and environmentalist who has authored more than 17 volumes of poetry and 15 novels, many of them award-winning. Piercy was born in 1936 in Detroit, Michigan, to a non-religious Presbyterian father and a mother who raised her Jewish. She studied and received degrees at both the University of Michigan and Northwestern University. Already in her early 20s, Piercy decided she wanted to write fiction that focused on politics, feminism, and working class people. In 1968, she became involved in STS, Students for a Democratic Society, and the New Left, as well as in the Civil Rights Movement. Piercy married 3 times. Her first marriage ended when she was only 23, due, she explains, to her husband's rigid expectation of gender roles within a marriage. She married again in 62, divorced, and is now married to Ira Wood, with whom she's been living for many years in Moultrie, Massachusetts. Piercy's writing focuses chiefly on feminist concerns and social issues. Her poetry is written free verse and is highly personal. It shows a commitment to social change, or which she calls in Hebrew tikkun olam, or repairing the world in the pursuit of social justice. If Marge Piercy's poetry could be said to reflect a single overriding message, it is the personal is political. This is the phrase popularized by the publication of 1969 essay by feminist Carol Hanisch, and has been repeatedly described as a defining characterization of second wave feminism. We'll be examining some of Piercy's poems from the book To Be of Use, published in 1973. There's a volume of socially conscious feminist poetry which fuses the personal and the political. The individual poems are all powerful, beautiful, and impassioned. But first, some context. You better appreciate just how much a rebel Piercy was in her lifetime and writings. It's useful to see her in the context of the feminist movement and its history. There have been several waves of feminism since the beginning of the feminist movement in Western society. Beginning in the 1840s, feminism was mostly white middle class, and the issues of concern were women's education, property rights, and the right to vote. A second wave of feminism began in the 1960s, where the issues of concern were gender, sexual liberation, reproductive rights, job opportunities, and violence against women. This more recent movement was heavily influenced by Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, published in 1968, which examined how girls were raised with certain limiting expectations, and The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan, published in 1963, which could critique the quote problem that had no name. How women were often depressed due to the limited choices they had in life. We're now seeing how much of themselves they had sacrificed in the name of conformity. Some key dates of the period are 1966, when the National Organization of Women was founded, 1968, when there was headline-making feminist protests at the Miss America contest in Atlantic City, arguing that the pageant was sexist and objectifying women, 1973, when, within Rose versus Wade, the Supreme Court legalized first trimester abortion. Then in 1975, the Supreme Court ruled it is unconstitutional to deny women from serving in juries. In that same year, the United Nations declared International Women's Year and organized the first World Conference on Women held in Mexico City. So before 1973, which is the year we're doing our poetry, women could be excluded from jury duty, being seen as emotionally driven creatures, less able than meant to think rationally and analytically. Abortion, or women's right to control over her own body, was illegal. And 26 states until 1965 even prohibited birth control and contraceptive devices for unmarried women. The first poem we'll be looking at is Marge Piercy's A Work of Artifice. The poem's message is conveyed through a metaphor comparing the socialization of a female to the cultivation of a bonsai tree. A bonsai tree, as you might know, is a potted plant, usually a tree that is dwarfed by continuous pruning to produce a miniature work of art. It's a work of artifice. The bonsai tree in the attractive pot could have grown 80 feet tall on the side of a mountain to split by lightning, but a gardener carefully pruned it. It is 9 inches high. Every day as he whittles back the branches, the gardener croons, "It is your nature to be small and cozy, domestic and weak. How lucky, little tree, to have a pot to grow in." With living creatures, one must begin very early to dwarf their growth. The bound feet, the crippled brain, the hair and curlers, the hands you love to touch. I especially like the last 2 lines, the hands you love to touch, because it personalizes the poem to hit home with the reader. The next poem we'll look at is titled In the Men's Rooms. To fully appreciate how radical this poem was when it was written, again, we need to look back to the 60s and 70s. Women then were most often relegated to inferior social status when it came to intellectual pursuits, and was still being seen primarily as sex objects, playthings to please and satisfy men. In the New Left movement, those of us who remember, the overwhelming majority of speakers were male. Women behind the scenes would type up the men's speeches, pack the sandwiches, and be expected to offer emotional support to the self-defined revolutionaries. In political discussions at coffee houses, men would debate the topics of the day, often boisterously, while the women sat listening in silence. If a woman voiced an opinion, it was often ignored and not taken anywhere seriously as an opinion expressed by a male. How a self-described lefty related to his girlfriend was personal, never the meat of political discourse. Enter March Pearson. In the first of 3 stanzas of the poem, In the Men's Rooms, the narrator, who believes in intellectual conversation, tries to impress the men with her ideas, and in doing so, get their approval as an equal. In the second stanza, the poet acknowledges that she has been rebuffed, as being seen by the men as a sexual thing only, trying to get their attention. In the last stanza, the narrator has now gained important new insight. Watch what the men do, she says, not what they say. All the rest is decoration. To this in the men's rooms. When I was young, I believed in intellectual conversation. I thought the patterns we wove in stale smoke floated off to the heaven of ideas. To be certified worthy of high masculine discourse, like a potato on a grater, I would rub on contempt, suck snobs, wade proudly through the brown stuff on the floor. They were talking of integrity and existential ennui, while the women ran out for 6-packs and had abortions in the kitchen and fed their children and were auctioned off. Eventually, of course, I learned how their eyes perceived me. When I bore to them, cupped in my hands, a new poem to nibble, when I brought my aerial maps of Sartre or Marx, they said she's trying to attract our attention. She's offering up her breasts and thighs. I walked on eggs, their tremulous equal. They saw fish peddler hawking in the street. Now I get chorus when the abstract nouns start flashing. I go out to the kitchen to talk cabbages and habits. I try hard to remember to watch what people do. Yes, keep your eyes on the hands. Let the voice go buzzing. Economy is the bone, politics is the flesh. Watch who they beat and who they eat. Watch who they relieve themselves on. Watch who they own. The rest is decoration. The next poem, Doing It Differently, examines an intimate relationship the poet has with a man in her life and the desire to build a more equitable bond. It is a difficult task given that gender norms and expectations, socialization, language, and even the state itself are obstacles to this achievement. The poem is written in 8 parts, of which we'll examine sections 6 and 7. In stanza 6, the poet brings her lover a rose she has grown. Her lover compares the rose to the poet as being dark, red, and perfumed, and then he talks of fucking the rose. In responding, Pearson concludes that she and her lover will never be free of roles of dominance and submission, while they, quote, continue to slam to the maze of that pinball machine. Piercy then redefines the rose as a place where we make love. Together we are the rose, she writes, and her body is most beautiful when fitted with his. Here the juxtaposition of his fucking the rose, where they're seeing the rose as a place where the two make love, couldn't be more explicit. In stanza 7, the poet states that though she and her lover struggle to be equal, society, custom, and the state stand in the way. The state owns my womb, she explains, while tradition and even language conspire to impede the equality for which they strive. To be equal, she concludes, love has to come freely in ways which might not always feel safe, or where no one person can possess another. So doing it differently. You lay in bed depressed and passive as butter. I brought you a rose I had grown. You said the rose was me, dark, red, and perfumed, and 3/4 open, soft as sometimes with embarrassment to praise my skin. You talked to fucking the rose. Then you grew awkward. You would never be free of roles, domination, and submission. We slammed to the masses of that pinball machine forever. I say the rose is a place where we make love. I am a body beautiful only when fitted with yours. Otherwise, it walks, it lifts packages, it spades, it is functional or sick, tired or sturdy, it serves. Together we are the rose. Full red is the inside of the womb and head of the penis. Blossoming as we encircle, we make a symmetrical, fragrant emblem that separate into discrete workday selves. The morning mail is true, tomorrow's picket line is true, and the rose of our loving, crimson and sonorous as a cello, bowing on the curve of the spines is true. We will be equal, we say, new man and new woman, but what man am I equal to before the law of court or custom? The state owns my womb, it hangs a man's name on me, like the tags hung on dogs. My name is property of. The language betrays us, it rots in the mouth, with its aftertaste of monastic sewers on the palate. Even the pronouns tear my tongue with their metal plates. Yes, you could strangle me, my hands can't even encircle your neck, because I open my mouth wide and stand up roaring. I'm the outright enemy of men. A party means when a bullfight dusts the bull, the street is a gauntlet. I open my mail with tongs. All the images of strength in you, fathers and prophets and heroes, pull against me. To what feels right to you wrongs me, and there's no rest from struggle. We are equal if we make ourselves so, every day, every night, constantly renewing what the street destroys. We are equal only if you open too on your heavy hinges and let your love come freely, freely, where it'll never be safe, where you can never possess. Okay, the last poem of March Pierce's that we discussed is entitled Bearing Blues for Janis. The Janis of the title refers to American singer-songwriter Janis Joplin. Joplin was one of the most successful and widely known rock performers of her era. She had a powerful mezzo-soprano voice with a distinctly raspy sound. Among her hits were Cry Baby and Me and Bobby McGee. She died in 1970, aged only 27, of an accidental heroin overdose. The poem portrays Janis as a strong voice, which recounts the hardships that women must endure in their dealings with men, feeling the need to sacrifice themselves in order to maintain their relationships. It is a sacrifice that borders in self-denial and masochism. Bearing Blues for Janis is certainly one of Pierce's most powerful poems in portraying women's predicament vis-a-vis men. The term scag in the last line is slang for heroin. The Bearing Blues for Janis. Your voice always whacked me right in the funny bone of the great-hearted suffering bitch fantasy that ruled me like a huge copper moon with its phases until I could partially break free. How could I help but cherish you for my bad dreams? Your voice would grate right on the marrow-filled bone that cooks up that rich stew of masochism where we swim. Woman is born to suffer, mistreated and cheated. We are trained to that hothouse of exploitation. Never do we feel so alive, so in character, as when we're walking on the floor with the all-night blues. When some man, not being there, who's better gone, becomes a lack that swells up to a gaseous balloon and flattens from us all thinking and sensing and purpose. Oh, the downtrodden, juicy, long-drawn female blues. You throbbed up there with your face slightly swollen and your barbed hair flying, energy out, the whole life is a fuel. You embody the good done-in mama who gives and gives like a fountain of boozy chicken soup to radrace the men. You embody the pain hugged in the breast like a baby. You embody the beautiful blousy gum of passivity, woman on her back to the world, endlessly, hopelessly, raggedly offering a brave front to be fucked. That willingness to hang on the meat hook and call it love, that need for loving like a screaming hollow in the soul, that's the drug that hangs us and drags us down, deadly as the icy sleet of scag that froze your blood.
Everyone here, I'm sure, has heard of Langston Hughes. But tonight, we're going to talk about the Langston Hughes you have not heard of. No, not his private life, his poetry. I'm going to give some background on Langston Hughes. He was what I would consider a real Renaissance man. Langston Hughes' grandfather was killed along with John Brown. he was one of the 12 that was involved with the raid. His grandmother raised him. And she was very proud of the fact that her husband was involved with John Brown. Langston Hughes grew up in various locations, sometimes with his mother, sometimes with his grandmother. He came to Harlem in the 1920s because of the Renaissance and to go to City College. There was no writer more important to the Negro Renaissance of the 1920s than Langston Hughes. He's the only writer of that period that was still writing when he died in 1967. He never stopped writing. After the Harlem Renaissance was over, and the reason it was over is because, one, the Depression, and like, to quote Langston Hughes, when the Depression came, Negroes were no longer in vogue. So they had to go back to whatever job they had before the Negro Renaissance happened. Some became teachers, one became a nurse, several were librarians. Langston had no job to go back to. So he was offered in 1932 a trip to Russia, and they were supposed to be doing a film there. And he went with Gwendolyn Bennett, Bruce Nugent, several of the people from the Renaissance, actors, Georgette Harvey. And they went there to make this film about race relations in America. It was to be called Black and White. The Russian government got pressure from the US government. The film was never made, and most of them came back to the United States. Langston decided to travel while he was there, and he visited Japan, China, and the Soviet Union. For a year he was there, just traveling. And while he was there, he wrote some very political poems, poems that were anti the conditions here. And he also criticized this government. He stayed there for about a year, and then he traveled to Europe. He came back to the United States in the mid-1930s. And he had problems because of his trip to Russia. One of the problems was the company he kept doing these trips there. The agitators in Europe and several of his friends who were communists. And so he had a difficult time getting stable here. Come to the 1940s, it was the greatest period for him. The 1940s, he wrote an autobiography. He also was able to travel around the country. He received foundation grants, lecturing in the colleges. He had 3 books of poetry, and he had 4 plays that opened on Broadway. None successful. And as a writer, he was very successful. It was the greatest period. And then came 1948. Because of his activities, the government came after him. He was denounced as a communist, and he was attacked in the Red Channels. The Red Channels was a magazine that told the producers who was a communist. And he was listed, but many people were listed. Lena Horne was listed. She was boycotted from TV and radio for 7 years. There was an actor, I'm sure Stephen will help me with this, a Black actor who was involved with the Communist Party, and he was very successful. And they destroyed his career. He played Bigger Thomas in Native Son. He did Cry the Beloved Country, and all of a sudden, he couldn't get work. He put an ad in Variety, but he never got work and died of a broken heart. The people that Langston was involved with that got him in trouble, Paul Robeson, Richard Wright, Louise Patterson, Hazel Scott, who was married to Adam Clayton Powell, she was another one that suffered from it. In 1950s, he went through hell. Whenever he went to speak, there would be demonstrations. His booking agency dropped him, and he led a shadow life. He was resurrected by the movement of the 1960s, Alice Walker especially. And he was rediscovered as a poet, as a writer. They treated him like royalty, especially Lorraine Hansberry. And as much as him and Baldwin argued, they greatly respected each other. And what we're going to do is talk about him in the 1960s when he was rediscovered. And at that time, he became militant again and was able to write what he wanted to write. And Alicia and I will read some of the poems that almost nobody's heard of now that he wrote during the 1960s. You want to start with that? This is Song of the Refugee Rome. Referee Rome, where do I go from here? Weary my feet, heavy the road. My heart is filled with fear. The ones I left far behind, home nowhere. Dark winds of trouble moan through my mind. Bitter my past, tomorrow what's there? Where do I go from here? Walking down the road. Must I beg? Must I steal? Must I lie? Must I kneel? Driven like dumb, war-weary sheep, must we wander the high road and weep? Or will the world listen to my appeal? From China, where the war gods thunder and roar. From all the dark lands where freedom is no more. Vienna, the city of light and gladness, once gay with horses, now bowed in sadness. Dark Ethiopia, stripped of her myth. Spain, where the shells plant steel seeds in the sky. O Statue of Liberty, lighting tomorrow, look and have pity on my sorrow. Home nowhere, none to care. Bitter my past, tomorrow what's there? Where do I go from here?
Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat or crust and sugar over like a syrup sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode?
There's a certain amount of traveling in a dream deferred. A certain amount of nothing in a dream deferred. A certain amount of impotence in a dream deferred. There's liable to be confusion in a dream deferred. From river to river, uptown and down, there might be confusion when a dream gets kicked around.
Junior addict, the little boy who sticks a needle in his arm and seeks an out in otherworldly dreams, who seeks an out in eyes that droop and ears that close to Harlem screams, cannot know, of course, and has no way to understand a sunrise that he cannot see, beginning in some other land, but destined sure to flood and soon the very room in which he leaves his needle and his spoon, the very room in which today the air is heavy with the drug of his despair. Quick sunrise, come before the mushroom bomb pollutes his stinking air with better death than is his living here, with viral drugs that bring today's release and poison from the fallout of our peace. It's easier to get dope than it is to get a job. Yes, easier to get dope than to get a job. Daytime or nighttime job, teenage, pre-jab, pre-lifetime job. Quick sunrise, come. Sunrise out of Africa. Quick, come. Sunrise, please come.
This is the final for power. Here on the edge of hell stands Howard, remembering the old lies, the old kicks in the back, the old be patient they told us before. Sure, we remember. Now when the man at the corner store says sugar's going up another 2 cents and bread 1, and there's a new tax on cigarettes, we remember the jobs we never had, never could get, and can't have now. So we stand here on the edge of hell and look out on the world and wonder and wonder and wonder what we're going to do in the face of what we remember. Thank you. Are there any questions about any of the poets we covered tonight? You can ask. Any questions? Yes.
First, thank you for this event, and thank you to everyone who was a part of like making these poets come alive. I was curious about Langston Hughes. Was he ever officially affiliated with like a communist or a socialist party, or was it just by being with being in Moscow or being in Russia?
By association. He went before the House Committee on Un-American activities. And he testified, and they would not sign off on him because he wouldn't give names. But he was not a communist, but so many of his friends were. You know, his best friend, Louise Patterson, her husband was the president of the Communist Party in New York. And they went back till the period of the Renaissance, you know, but he survived it. He was the only writer of the Renaissance that was still writing at the time of his death, thanks to the movement of the 1960s. Any other question? Yes.
How did you select the people to go?
We had about 25. And how we select them were the ones we could get books. There were so many. Either the book was out of print. Poetry books don't seem to stay in print unless you're very popular. They were out of print, or they went on, friend went on, what's that thing you go on now to get something? Amazon. And found out the book was like $100. In fact, Wanda Robinson's old albums cost a fortune now. Me and a friend?
Yeah, me and a friend.
Yeah, you know, she did too. So that's how we selected. And I let whoever my readers were, out of that 25 that we could get books on, them, because I wanted them to feel comfortable with what they were reading also. And the middle of the month, we will be again in Staten Island, it's part of New York City, I'll say that again. And you're welcome to come. The ferry is free, I'll say that again. And we're going to do a continuation of some of the poets that we didn't cover this time. Question?
The name of the bookstore again,
It's Everything Goes. It's on Bay Street, right across from a park, Key Food, and what else is there? The Welfare Center. In fact, you can walk from the ferry, it's like 10 blocks. Yes. And I want to give a shout out to the 3 librarians who helped me so much, because one of them is here tonight, and patience is beyond, because I know they must think I've been very difficult, you know.
No.
And they made the mistake of giving me their cell number. So I was able to call them at home. But I want to thank one of them who's here tonight. Allison, would you stand and let somebody know? She is absolutely great. The other is Vanessa and Rod, and they're not here, Robert. But the 3 of them have been absolutely great and so tolerant of me. And I appreciate it. I love you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
This is actually a question for everyone who spoke today.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so it's.
I'll let them speak.
The question is essentially, I mean, every poem that was displayed has some level of like powerfulness to it, some type of movement and motivation. Is there anyone in particular that calls out to you the most out of all the ones you read? Like, they're all universally great, objectively speaking, but I feel like, especially as you prepare for situations like this where you recite, is there anyone that calls out to you more than the others?
I did not know about Wanda Robinson until James introduced me to do this. And I just realized yesterday something that connected me to her writing. I remember when I'm retired now, but I remember when I was working, you know, sometimes people will send you little attachments or whatever, something. And so it was one, and it was, the strong Black woman died today or something like that. But anyway, it hit me so that I made a copy of it, and I still have it somewhere. And then as I was going through YouTube and different things to find out more information about her and everything, and then I was listening to somebody read a poem of her. I was like, oh my gosh, that's her. I said, oh, I had no idea that that was this woman, that because it said unknown
Yes.
at the bottom of the paper that I had. So
Yes, that's how
you know, I
she
had
was writing
nobody
at
to-
one time.
yeah, I
Yes.
had nobody to identify it with, but it was just such a powerful poem that I always kept it, you know. And then when I did the two that I read today, I was like, I can understand that whole thing about the what is it, love at first sight thing, you know? And I can definitely understand karma too, because sometimes people come to you like, oh, what in the world is this? What's going on? You know, I may not go to the depths that she did with it, but I can definitely understand it.
No.
So for me, I was thinking about some of her essays, and I'm not of Audre Lorde's, and I'm not sure which one, but it's from Sister Outsider, where she talks about emotion and intuition as like being negated by the patriarchy, and how that's like such a wisdom that women bring. And so when I was choosing the poems, I was going with my intuition and my emotion, and the one that spoke to me the most was the first one I read, because it was just felt so much like the moment that we're in, like that, like in the middle of winter, and like grief for so many things, but also like noticing the beauty around. And I think she does that so perfectly in that poem.
Stephen.
I related a lot to the poem, Doing It Differently, because it deals with how people work on the relationships. I mean, you don't want to work on the relationship to its death. But on the other hand, we all come with so much baggage, given we live in a patriarchal society. So when two people try to make a more equitable, say, liberated type of relationship, there's a lot going on which makes against their being able to succeed in doing that. So I think that's been a problem back in 50 years ago when she wrote about it, and it's still a problem in spite of the fluidity people have now, with the more options women have than that of the roles they play within relationships. But we were really bogged down by all of the traditional roles and expectations, and you know, rigidness of the traditional ways of being a masculine or feminine. Yeah.
Lydia?
You're gonna make me go? Okay. So I didn't know much about Wanda Robinson. I still really don't, but John Harvey's Blues, the first one that I read, really got to me. And I don't really know too much about the background of the poem, but my interpretation is, you know, being close to someone that is not well and just kind of wishing you could take their pain away by any means necessary. And that really spoke to me because my mother, she has multiple sclerosis, and hasn't been doing well lately. And I think I got even a little emotional towards the end of the poem, because it really just really spoke to me. It just stood out. So, yeah, that's me.
I love Wanda Robinson. I met her several times when I was living in Washington. We would go and hear her read. And I'm just glad that she started writing again under the name
Leonie Mataka.
of Langston Hughes. The poem that stood out for me was one that I did not read because he wrote it for Nina Simone, and I wanted you guys to hear her sing. It's called Backlash Blues. Yes. And he wrote that about 6 months before he died, and he gave it to him.
Wow.
And it is absolutely beautiful, but I wanted you to hear the recording, and I was unable to. But if you can, Nina Simone singing Langston Hughes, he wrote it as a poem and told her, put the music to it. And she did.
Wow, that's.
Well, they were fans of each other. They were big fans, you know, the four of them, Lorraine Hansberry. In fact, Lorraine Hansberry, husband, swears that she would have been a great musician if she hadn't let those motherfuckers, Langston Hughes and I'm talking about, and Lorraine Hansberry. I'm sorry, Nina Simone's husband made that comment. You know, they pushed her to be radical and bold, the three of them.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I thought, when you read, Raisin in the Sun, I was surprised that Langston Hughes had written that. And that yeah, and that, you know, the play that Lorraine Hansberry.
Yeah, they were friends. And she was thinking of doing, before she did that, A Raisin in the Sun, she was thinking of using his other poem, Mother to Son. Because you know, in a lot, when you think of the play, it's really about the mother and the son a lot. Any other questions? No? Okay, yes.
Well, this is, you know, I was with somebody the other day, and he was telling me that before Black History Month came about, in the South during Jim Crow was Black History, before Black History Month came about. It was Black History every day in the schools. And I mean, you know, to relegate Black History to 1 month is just something that, you know, we need to struggle against that and bring Black history where we can. And it's so inspiring to hear these poets.
Well,
And you know, you say that that Calvin Hurton was a difficult man. And I turned to my comrade here, I'm Stephen from the Freedom Socialist Party. And I said, well, he's not the only difficult man in the room.
Speaking for you. I say it all the time.
I just want to say that he's hard to understand, but one thing really spoke to me in the poem. And I think I wrote it down correctly. And you know, it's such a crazy world we're living in. And this was the poem that you read, James. Something comes from something, and nothing comes from nothing. And that is something that I am not going to allow to drive me crazy. Beautiful. I'm going to put that on. I will send that to a friend tonight. As a socialist feminist too, you know, the Percy, the woman, but Marge Percy and about relations, and you know, we thought that they'd come out and be gay and everything be fine and it'd be in nirvana. But we have the same problems in our relationships. Everybody else.
Everybody. Relationships are hard work. I do, Stephen, I do want to mention, we were able, I lived in the South, I went to school there for 5 years.
Right.
And we were able to have Black history every day because we were segregated. The only time the whites came to our school was like once or twice a year when we were begging for funding, you know. So they never, two of my aunt and Aunt Irene Francis were teachers. Do you know Aunt Irene?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think you're the only one left at class.
Yeah, I spent the summer with them.
Okay. I was there for 5 years. She was a teacher. And what they would do is, it wasn't Xerox or whatever they call it now. They would mimeograph all the material. And the only time we opened those books is when those overseers came like a couple of times in June. They mimeographed stuff for us. A footnote. They always sang, lift every voice and sing. When I came, we weren't aware of that song until the 1960s. James Weldon Johnson wrote that during World War I. He was a principal in Jacksonville, Florida.
He wrote it for, Booker T.
For Booker T. Okay, and we sung that every day, every week in assembly. And then we sung the Star Spangled Banner. They were appalled that I had never heard of the Negro National Anthem when I went south. Because we didn't, I don't care what they say, we didn't do it here. It wasn't sung, and we never heard of it until the 1960s. And I had fights about that, but that's a
Speaking of Juneteenth, I never heard of Juneteenth until I went to Alaska.
Oh, wow.
I went to Georgia and found out about it. Yeah. No? No. No. Okay, you can wrap. And then Emily would like to make an announcement.
Well, if you haven't heard enough of Jimmy yet, you have an opportunity to hear more from him at an event next Saturday, February 24th. I invite you to Freedom Hall in Harlem on 128th Street and Malcolm X. The Freedom Socialist Party is going to be showing his film Banding Hamers America. And Jimmy's going to be making a commentary after the film to kick off our discussion. And everyone's been invited to join in the discussion. And we'll also have a nice dinner at 5 p.m. And the program will be at 6 p.m. And the Freedom Hall is in Harlem, and so we'll be celebrating Black History Month. But I agree, every month should be Black History Month, and is in fact Black History Month. But I hope everyone could come out. If you didn't get a flyer in the folders, I have more here.
Okay, thank you, guys. Thank you very, very much. And please stand. Because they're doing this in the knowledge that this is done free.
We have books by several of the folks who we heard about right up here. Thanks everyone who joined us online.